quickly time goes in this class, so we'd love to make the most of our time with Katrina today. And I'm so happy and honored to welcome Katrina Blair. And if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Durango, Colorado, in the southwest corner, Colorado, and really fell in love with the land and the people too. I love how the land sculpts the people. And when I was 11, I had this experience where I was floating on this lake, the Haviland Lake, just a little north of town. And my brother and cousins all went back and had lunch with our family, picnicking on the side. And I just kept paddling on this air mattress and went around the corner to this bank. And these plants on the bank just beckoned me over, and I crawled bare through the muck and sat down, and then just got this euphoric experience where it really felt like the plant said, "You're home and you're going to live your life with us." And so I took that message very seriously, and I decided right after high school to camp out by myself and just eat all wild edible foods. And so I didn't know so much yet about things, and so I just brought tons of books with me, and I had a bicycle. And I would bike sometimes to town because I worked in town with kids. But then I lived in the woods, so I would stash my bike, cross a log, and then go up. And I had made a little lean-to, and I camped out there. And the only food that I brought with me was a little cereal that I would soak overnight, which was a buckwheat, flax, and sunflower seeds. And I would soak them overnight and eat that for breakfast. But other than that, I didn't bring any other food with me, and I just ate the wild greens and berries and roots, and I was experimenting, and it was really expansive summer, and then my passion just continued into college, and I got a degree in biology and wrote my senior project on the edible and medicinal plants of the San Juan Mountains, and then continued into graduate school in holistic health education. And when I returned back to Durango, which I always knew would be home base, I started a nonprofit called Turtle Lake Refuge, and our mission as a nonprofit is to celebrate the connection between personal health and wild lands. And so I just have known, as we all probably know, how incredibly intimate that relationship is for our own health and wild places. We need our wild places to keep us in this thriving integrity. And so our nonprofit has all these different dimensions to it, but we have a wild food cafe. It's a local wild and living foods cafe. And we serve lunch every Turtle Tuesday and Frog Friday from 11:11 to 2:22. And we've been doing this for 20 years. Actually, when I first started, I didn't actually have a cafe yet. I just had a bicycle, a 3-wheel cart bicycle. And so the origin of serving these lunches was a fundraiser to help raise some money to buy this land by Turtle Lake. So I live near this lake. There are lots of turtles that live there, and the nickname is Turtle Lake. And so there was 60 acres of land for sale in 1998. And I called the number on the land, and the person said, "Oh yeah, we're going to build a big subdivision, Meadow Lake Estates here." And I thought that was a bad idea. So I wanted to see if we could protect that land in a different way, keep the wetlands vital. And so I started doing these wild food lunches off of my 3-wheel bicycle. And for a year, I would pedal all 4-course meal, all the dishes, plates. I even put a wheatgrass juicer on top and pedal the whole thing over to this community building, and twice a week serve this wild food lunch, $5 a plate. And after a year, I didn't quite raise 500 grand, but it's if you have this intention to go for something, the universe conspires to help you. So just our intention to move in that direction, it ended up working out that a neighbor bought the land, and with our encouragement, they did it on their own, but they put 47 acres into a conservation easement. So it was protected, and even if we didn't own it, it was still protected. And then I realized, well, it's more than just protecting one piece of land. It's really, we need to protect the wild lands everywhere on the planet. So that's why we kept going with the nonprofit. And then someone had a really smart idea about, wouldn't it be easier if the people came to us to have lunch instead of us bringing everything to them? So then we created a commercial kitchen in this community space that we're still in now. And we've been serving lunches consistently twice a week ever since. So every aspect of our nonprofit is this education on, how can we really serve and give back? How can we be the best stewards of this home that we can possibly be? So we also grow microgreens year-round, and for a long time we wanted to get local food into the schools, and there wasn't local food in the schools yet, and that was over 10 years ago, maybe 15. And we finally met with a group of school 9R people, and somehow we were able to get through this $5 million insurance policy, which was blocking a lot of the local farmers to be able to get into the school district. But because we could serve or sell these microgreens in bulk bags, that was somehow how we got through, where we didn't label them, and then the 9R district took responsibility, so our microgreens were opened the door to the local food, and we're still serving our microgreens in all the public schools in Durango. At least last year. This year, we don't know what's happening. We'll see what's going on, but anyway. And so that's happening year-round in our cafe at other times of the week. And then we also make wild food goodies from the acorns and the choke cherries, and we use the wild pigweed and amaranth seeds and the mallow, and really all these different kinds of wild plants. The dandelions, we make ice cream, and acorn nori chips, and we have all these different wild food products that we get into the health food stores. And then there's also a big educational component to everything we're doing. So we have a lot of classes, and I have a farm. I live out by Turtle Lake, and we have a community farm out there. And I found that throughout my time, I was in love with all these wild plants. And then I'd be biking home from town or something and just noticing some of the plants on the side of the road were all twisted and curled, and they had been sprayed with herbicides. And it's like, my best friends are getting hit on these, why are we discriminating against some plants and not other plants? And what was interesting is when I came into my land, I bought some land by Turtle Lake and lived in a teepee for the first year, and then built a little octagon house. And then a few years later, my closest neighbors, they bought some land, and then they started an herbicide chemical lawn care company right next door, and built this huge 20 by 40 shed where they stored their 10,000 gallon tanks of 10 different herbicides, some iron-based, and the stinkiest operation. And they'd have semi-trucks come down the little dirt road with these long tubes to fill up their 10,000 gallon tanks of all these different toxins, and it was always stinky. But then in October, when they cleaned out their tanks, that was the worst time of the year, because they would spray it all around the land. And they sprayed all the public parks in Durango and all the county roads. And so, of course, we saw very different sides on the issue of wild weeds and how to navigate land and be stewards of land. And so for 20 years, I lived next to my neighbors with this. I was afraid of their chemicals, and they were afraid of me because I was an alternative lifestyle type person. They weren't sure, because I would invite a lot of students over, and we'd have a lot of work farm parties, and that bothered them. So they called the county on me all the time. I had composting toilets and different things, and then I was definitely not fond of their business practices. And so we had this interesting rival going on. And it even, to the degree where an entire newspaper article was written about us, the dandelion debate on the front page, because I was very active. Because of them, they really motivated me to be an activist. I didn't want herbicides in my backyard, but I didn't want herbicides in anyone's backyard. So let's just make the use of them obsolete. Let's change the thinking. And so that's actually why I wrote this Wild Wisdom of Weeds book, which came out in 2014, but it's on how important these wild plants are, these wild weeds, how they are so essential for our health and for the planet across the globe. I mean, that book is focused on 13 wild plants that grow on every continent next to humans, because it's these wild weeds that actually, it's interesting, the old view is, the weeds are the problem. But when you look deeper, you realize, no, the weeds come to where there is a problem. They're nature's pioneer plants, the very first succession plants that come in when a disturbance happens. And who's the best disturbers of soil on the planet? It's humans. So we have this very intimate relationship with the weeds, and they follow humans around no matter where we live on the planet Earth. Wherever there's humans in permanent societies, you'll find these 13 wild weeds within our realm of living. But the beautiful thing is that these wild plants are incredible food and medicine for our survival. So even if some of the crops don't make it, or we have a big drought, or some of these other possibilities, these wild weeds are resilient. They don't need the water. They plant themselves. Their seeds are just being blown across the wind and have been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's incredible because these wild weed seeds are so integral. They have never been manipulated by humans. Where a lot of our garden vegetables, we hybridize, we change, we even get to the point of GMO, genetically modifying, and every time we do something to a seed, it might make it more convenient or more tasty or easier to harvest or more pest resistant, but the vital nutrition and its integral goes down. And so these wild seeds have never been, they're absolutely feral in a good way, and they've learned how to be very resilient and adapt to change. So what's incredible that when we eat them, it tells our body how to do that also. How do we be adaptive and manage change and be resilient to this time? So I find the wisdom of these wild plants just continually puts me into a humble, odd place. So it's interesting. So then I got very motivated to create organic parks in our town because I didn't want to be having my kids and friends' kids and our dogs and just the families being on these parks that are sprayed with herbicides when kids are the most susceptible, and dogs, and they're down in the grass being exposed. And so we worked with our city in 2008 saying, hey, we need an organic park, a chemical-free park. And so the city, long roundabout way, finally gave us, okay, we'll give you one park. So we got one park, and Turtle Lake Refuge, our nonprofit, volunteered to manage it. So we had weed harvesting parties, and we sprayed compost tea on it to help break down some of the chemical fertilizers and herbicides that had been sprayed on it. And it was a success, and the next year we asked for a second park. And it was incredible. The city gave us 2 parks. And so that was great. And then the city took on the management, and they didn't really do much. They just sort of left it alone, which was great enough for me. Then the 3rd year we said, okay, we want more parks. And they said, no. You people have a choice. That's enough. And out of 52 parks, that wasn't good enough for us. So I have a friend who used to be a lawyer, and we drafted an ordinance, a city ordinance. And we put it on the ballot. We timed it. We put it on the ballot in 2012, right when marijuana was going to be on the ballot also. And we knew all the weedy people were going to come out and vote yes. And so it was a very clever tactic, except that we wrote the ordinance so strictly. I mean, we did it exactly what we wanted, which was 100% organic overnight. But we didn't realize, but the city property included a big golf course, and it included, and then all these medians, and then they were concerned about mosquito spray too, and it was just this huge drama. And we were not the favorite faces of the city for a long time. A lot of city council meetings and heated discussions between me and my neighbors in these public forums. And so we actually ended up taking it off the ballot with high pressure from the mayor and the councils. And it was like, well, okay, we're going to take one step back. But then what we did is we wrote together with the city mayor and all the councilors and the Parks and Rec director, we rewrote an organic lands resolution. And that got passed unanimously. And then the next year, 1/3 of the parks got shifted over to organic. So we just took some steps with each other. So it's been a journey, and it's still a couple steps forward and a couple steps back. But it's actually one piece of Turtle Lake Refuge that we've developed is an organic weed mitigation business or project. And it's called Be Happy Lands. And so we have a crew of us, and we go out and if someone has, we've grown over the last 5-7 years. But the town of Telluride has hired us to manage the entire 500 acres of the valley floor. So we go and we'll pull out the thistles or the oxeye daisy, depending on what they don't want there. And then we'll sprinkle seeds every time we disturb the soil by even removing a plant. We're going to sprinkle a mixture of a part seed, a part compost, and a part mulch, like sawdust. Wow. So we'll reseed, and our whole goal is to fertilize and stabilize a land. And the weeds are only there because it's been disturbed, and every time you spray herbicides, that's just another disturbance, and it's only going to keep bringing the weeds every single year. So it's not the sustainable long-term approach that's successful. It just keeps fueling that thinking in that business. But if you want long-term change, then you got to change from the ground up. So we start with the soil and really nourish the soil, and then remove where we can. And if it's an organic area, then we'll harvest these weeds and use them in our cafe. So we use thistle root to make a chai tea that we sell at the farmer's market every Saturday. It sells out, super delicious. And we'll use the greens to make juice, and the whole plant is edible. We can experiment with that when we go out on our walk and eat some of that. But since then the town of Ophir has hired us to manage their wildlands, the town of Mancos outside of Durango, and just recently this year, the town of Durango hired us, slower in coming forward. So we have these really neat projects where we're working with land. So we also spray compost tea over the land, and then we create a homeodynamic weed remedy, which is, it's based on really a fun, you take the seeds and the roots of the plant and you burn it to an ash, and then you do a homeopathic method of dilution that creates a very, very dilute ash water, but restructures the water in a very potent solution. And it's communicating to that landscape saying, thank you so much for doing this incredible remediation work, but your job is actually, we're helping you do it quicker and you can move on. So it encourages the weeds actually to go elsewhere where they're needed, because we're helping stabilize and fertilize the landscape. And we've been finding that success in so many different realms. And then kind of a little miracle happened. A year and a half ago, my neighbors decided to sell their business and move. And so we were able, through my grandmother and my dad, who were both in the spirit world, and some financial wizardry, we were able to acquire their land, so, which is incredible. And the day that those huge herbicide tanks drove off on the trailer, I just laid down on the ground and cried. It was just like so potent to have that transformation happen in a lifetime. Wow. So, but since then, we've been doing an incredible amount of remediation to that land. And I did soil samples right away, where we took just these samples around the landscape, and we tested them. And even though there were 10 different herbicides, we could only test for 4, and they were all very toxic, very high of those 4. And then a winter happened, and then we started remediating for 6 months with tons of mulch and mushrooms and compost tea and microorganisms. And honestly, the very first time I put a shovelful of mulch on this bare, cracked, totally void of plants earth, it was just like the most healing balm experience for my own self, like my own skin getting to get re-nourished. So then after 6 months, we retested the soil, and only one herbicide was left, still detectable, which was glyphosate, which is the hard one to get rid of. And then, but we've been still inoculating. We were using oyster mushrooms primarily, but it was kind of fascinating. I've been learning a lot about mushrooms and what works and what other species are also so valuable. Oyster mushrooms are the most commonly thought of because it's been studied a little bit more than other mushrooms. But before even we bought the land, 2 years prior to that, I did a permaculture course, and I had all the students, we dug this huge trench right by the herbicide shed, which is the 40, 50-foot area. And we dug it down and we inoculated it with oyster mushrooms, and then we added straw and oak boughs and compost and filled it all in. And then 2 years went by and nothing happened. And this was on our side of the fence. But I just wanted a barrier to help protect our organic gardens from the potential runoff. And then we had this huge hurricane happen in Texas, and we got 10 days of solid rain. And after that, all these mushrooms exploded in that trench. But they were not oyster mushrooms. They actually were a saprophytic competitor called konosaibi, which is actually Colorado's one psilocybin mushroom, which was so fascinating. And they were all just this whole row. But when I picked one, it smelled just like herbicides. And so I knew that, and I did a little more research, that mushroom spore came in on straw that we had brought in, and it overcompeted the oyster mushroom that we had gotten from California. Actually, maybe we got more locally, but anyway, what I learned is that it sort of doesn't, for me, remediating with the land, it doesn't matter who the mushroom is. If you can do the job, you're welcome. So now I'm just looking for every moldy straw pile and every, kind of moldy mulch, wood chip area, and all those mycelium have some strain of mushroom that's going to most likely have the same capacity, which is to create an enzyme which can break down petrochemicals. So that's what we've been doing. It's just a constant addition of mulch and more mushroom we're breaking up into kind of a sawdust slurry, and then we pack it into the mulch and just keep adding more compost tea. And we tested again this year, and we still have glyphosate. It didn't go away yet. So still in the process of learning how to move that one quicker. But we're also in this process of converting the stinky shed into a schoolhouse. Wow. And so that's a huge ambitious project in a way, because all of that, concrete, it was on a concrete floor, but it's porous. And so it absorbed all these chemicals for 20 years. So it was the stinkiest shed ever. But what I've been doing is doing these clay facial masks on the floor. Wow. So I was given a huge amount of old, broken pottery, and we just re-wetted it, brought it back down to its clay, and then did these clay masks over this whole area, let it dry, and then we scraped it off and did multiple of those. And just last week, I actually dispersed, because what do you do with this sort of clay after? And so I thought, well, dilution is the solution. So I went on some back county roads and just dispersed it, kind of a little bit here and there on the roads, which seemed like a fine way to disperse it. But I could smell the herbicides in the clay, so I knew it worked. I knew it was working and drawing it out. And then what we did just recently is there's an organic product called Safe Seal. So we applied Safe Seal to all the walls and the floor, which then whatever we couldn't draw out, we're hoping to just seal in. Anyway, so that's where we are in that process, and it's been a journey of learning, going from, because the 2 acres that I've had for the last 28 years is now this huge food forest with hundreds and hundreds of fruit trees. Big, tall, overgrowth trees such as apricot and pear and apple and cherry and walnut, and then hundreds of all the understory trees like buffalo berry and Nanking cherry and serviceberry and gooseberry and wild currants and wild plums and apricots. So and then below that, of course, there's Oregon grapeberries and lots of perennial, raspberries and strawberries and comfrey, tons of other wild plants too mixed in. So we have this older food forest and then this new land that is kind of like a blank slate as far as what it gets to become. So it's quite amazing. And it was neat, the very first year we purchased the land, this is our second summer, so I guess it was last fall, 2 falls ago. I was teaching a course called Local Wild Living Soil, and I had all these students, and all of a sudden when we acquired this land, it came with a really nice house. So I had instant student housing. So it's been great, and a lot of students are still there, and now it's also been moved, more people have come in and out, and we've created a community farm. We've expanded our community farm, kind of doubled it. So that's a little bit of my background on sort of where I'm coming from, and I'm just excited to be here today to share sort of my passion with the wild foods with all of you. I guess just one more piece about sort of my passion is that every year I take a wild food journey where I don't take any food and I go for a walkabout. And I'll just hike from Durango to Silverton and take 10 days, or Or actually for the last 13 years, I've hiked from Durango to Telluride because it timed so well with the Mushroom Festival. And this is the first year I haven't hiked here, to Telluride in 13 years. But my body this year was like, I still have to go on a walkabout. So I went out just before I came out here and took a big journey. But it's a time where I get to just eat wild foods. And there's something in my experience when I only do that. One is my backpack is so light, and I just drink from the creeks, and I sleep under a tarp if it's raining or not if it's not. And it's just a way of recentering. I knew as a kid that I would, if ever I needed to go to the doctor, that was the doctor. You just go to the woods and you start walking, and you eat the food, and you drink the water, and you sleep on the ground. And it's incredible how we get healed on all levels. It's just, oh yeah, I remember who I am and what I'm here to do. And there's so much that's here to support us to do that, that's for free. It's just this effortless giving of the universe. And so it's, when I go on these walkabouts, it's so special because, sometimes when we go on hikes, the wild food is a sweet addition, but when it's the primary, then we don't have any other salt or sweetness or other flavors that can distract. So when we eat the food direct, like a wild animal, just from hand to mouth, it's so clear, both the information that comes from the plants and how I feel, and the connection of how much do I need, and just all that information that we have accessible to us is more obvious when there's less distractions. So it's been such a laboratory for my personal learning to just go out in these wild times and just forage and commune in it all. So thanks for listening to that little monologue spiel. Yeah. My mom had arthritis before I was born, and she got serious rheumatoid arthritis. And after 12 years of Western medical surgeries, and she took over 95,000 different drugs, she got inspired to do a juice fast. And I was 2 years old when this happened. And she juiced for 4 days. And after the 4th day, her pain disappeared. And she says it like that, 12 years of chronic pain, and after 4 days, it was gone. And for her, this was, what have I been missing my whole, this whole time? And she then went on to get a degree in holistic nutrition, and in the process, raised my brother and I with green juices twice a day. So before breakfast and before dinner, we would have these green juices. And that was just, and also a lot of living foods and fresh things was part of our diet. And so she taught me to be the master of my own health, in the sense of, if you do something, notice how you feel and be a detective, be the scientist that observes. And so that's just been such a guiding light for me. And then,
I was wondering about algae.
Yeah.
Do you ever take the algae off of ponds and stuff and dry it?
I haven't done so much of that. Yeah. I can imagine it's wonderful.
It's supposed to be wonderful, but I don't know.
I've certainly, had some blue-green algae before and spirulina before, but I haven't myself done that. Yeah. So, yeah, but the greens, the chlorophyll, of course, that's what we are going to get to go and tap into even more so, but it's the chlorophyll that is just so vital for recharging our blood. It provides oxygen, liquid oxygen in the chlorophyll. It's kind of incredible how chlorophyll is so close to hemoglobin if you look at it under a microscope. And really the only difference is the nucleus. In the blood it's iron, and in chlorophyll it's potassium. And so when we drink chlorophyll from greens, it's incredible. It's almost like a blood transfusion right from the sun. The plant's blood just gets to infuse our body. And so, yeah, the greens that we'll be drinking will be chlorophyll enzymes, which is the vital life, and then all the minerals that we are so beneficially supported by. And one of my favorite things to encourage everyone to do is eating the wild weeds and seaweeds. Those are two incredible sources of minerals that just re-infuse our system with that integrity that can get lost if we're eating conventional foods, which are demineralizing. Yeah.
I was also wondering about whether you ferment. Do you use?
Yeah, I love fermenting. And with Turtle Lake Refuge, we do a lot of kimchi and sauerkraut, and we make kombucha. And I also, my mom studied with Ann Wigmore. I don't know if that's a name that you recognize, but incredible health activist. And so I also learned from my mom, actually, because I didn't study with Ann, but Rejuvelac, which is just fermented either wheat berries or rye berries or buckwheat or millet, but a grain, and then you drink the cultured water. That's just about 3 days, light lemony twang, just to create that good, fauna in our gut, all the microbial life that we want to infuse our system with. Yeah.
How do you say that again?
Rejuvelac. Rejuvelac.
And then what was the name?
Ann Wigmore. And she was the one who brought, she's Lithuanian, and she brought wheatgrass to this country. It was sort of her, it was her grandmother who taught her back in Lithuania when there was a lot of warring soldiers happening, and her grandmother would use goat milk and wheat and ryegrass as the healing for wounds. And she would dress the wounds with the fresh grass and the goat milk and heal the wounds that way. And Anne was 7 years old, and they sent her out as a little sheep herder, because all the other sheep herders, because of the war, actually had died. But she had to do that work, and so she grew up from 7 to 18 just being out by herself in the woods, being with the sheep. And then when she was 18, her parents brought her to America, because they left her with her grandmother and they came to America. So she came to America, and then at some point she got into an injury with a wagon rolling over her leg, and her leg went gangrene, and they were going to cut it off. But she had just turned 18, and so she got to make her own decision, and she said no, because she remembered that she could heal it with grass. And so she had her uncle take her to the park and set her on the park grass and leave her there, and she would just chew the grass, and a dog licked her wound too, but it healed. And then later in life, she ended up running the Boston Marathon, and disguised as a man, because they wouldn't let women run the marathon at that point, so she shaved her head and ran it. And she's written tons of books, and she's just an incredible inspiration. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I know. Great. Yeah, great. Well, good question. Yeah, totally.
So what's your advice for the whole COVID fear thing?
Well, it's so interesting how there's the Western medical model, and sometimes there's wisdom to that. It's an invasive model sometimes, in the sense of it's not always, well, okay, let's see how I want to say this. So here's one perspective that I love. This, and this was spoken by a doctor named Zach Bush. I don't know if anyone's heard of him, but he's a MD that gave a little talk, and he used the same analogy, which I love. He used the same analogy of weeds. He said, it's not the weeds that are the problem, and we're trying to kill the weeds. The weeds are actually supporting the Earth's health. And viruses can be seen that way, where they're not the villain. They're created by the body to support our immune system. And they're actually, if we're being exposed to a lot of antibiotics, and not necessarily that we are, but some people who are in more susceptible situations later in life, or in hospitals or nursing homes or whatever, they may be exposed to a lot of more pharmaceutical drugs and antibiotics, in which case our bacterial microorganism, sort of our microbial life, which includes a lot of bacteria, can no longer live in the presence of these antibiotics and some of the harsher pharmaceutical drugs. So without our bacteria force working for us, we create a virus which has been studied to break down toxins that the bacteria can't. So our body can create viruses to break down things to protect us from an environmental situation that we might be compromised. So if we look at it from that way, it's almost the same thing. It's not about war on virus. It's about building our immune system health, right? It's the preventative from the inside out. And then also there's this perspective of, we're in a new situation environmentally, a lot of new challenges in this modern age, including frequencies that we've never experienced before. And some of the patterns they've seen with some of the epidemics that have come in the past have tied in with these big changes in our electrical circuiting, such as when the telephones line all went across the country. That was tied in right with the last one of the past epidemics. And so it's when some big change is happening and we have to adapt, we are going to be experiencing challenge. So the best thing we can do, if we can't control always our environment out there, is to build up our own healthy ecosystem within. And so I guess I don't see the virus as a villain. I actually see it as an ally. That's my take. Yeah. And then it's up to us to, how do we protect our immune system and be wise and preventative lifestyle, but then also maybe together, how can we adapt to some of these bigger changes that I don't know how to do. I mean, with the maybe 5G coming in on a new frequency level, how do we adapt to that or change that? And it may be a little bit of both. Yeah, there's some big unknowns there, but we know we can at least protect our inner and our close environment and do the preventative things that really support our microbial diversity. And that's really the essence, is that when we have a diversity working for us within our bodies, by eating garden vegetables and wild weeds, because you're getting the whole microcosm on the leaf or in the soil, when we create healthy soil, that goes into our body, and all of a sudden we have this diversity of like a force that's working towards our health. So when something comes into our system, it's not going to just wreak havoc, because we have so many checks and balances that will put a stop to getting out of balance. So that's, I feel, is our best thing, is just work with our immune system as our primary. Well, let's go walk around outside. So I'd love to just start with comfrey. I mean, there's so many amazing plants, all of it. But I mentioned that we as a family would drink green juice twice a day. And my mom was a nutritionist. She wasn't into wild foods. That wasn't her orientation so much. It was actually my dad, who is the mountaineer and the skier, climber, and geologist, who really opened the door to the wild to me. But for me, when I put outdoors and nutrition, it led me to wild plants as the optimal nutrition. But in our green juices at home, my mom was introduced to comfrey by an old friend of hers who is passed on now, but she was in her 80s when she introduced to my mom. But she just brought her a quart of green juice, and it was just comfrey greens. And so my mom started drinking comfrey juice. And then that was actually our family's green juice twice a day, the entire summer, until the plants died back. And then in the winter, we would use other things like parsley or spinach or things we could buy at the store, or we would grow wheatgrass. But comfrey greens is still a green juice that I use regularly all the time. And I just put, a handful of greens in. It could be 5 or 10 leaves in the blender, very dilute. I add tons of water, blend it up, and then I strain it out. And it's this dark green juice that tastes like cucumber. And what's fun about with my mom is that she doesn't have arthritis anymore. She has a body that has been surgically replaced, almost every joint in her entire body. Toes, fingers, elbows, knees, hips, everything has been replaced surgically over those time. But as far as arthritic pain or degeneration, she doesn't have that. And if ever she eats more refined foods and notices congestion start happening again, her pain medication is green juice. And it's the greens that decongest and chelate to toxins and get it out of our system. And comfrey has been one of the most healing herbs in her experience for that, and in my experience too growing up. And I guess I'm just going to speak a little bit about comfrey, because in a lot of the herbology books, comfrey comes with a lot of caution. Don't ever use it internally, and caution. And I had a friend who was we questioned that. It was like, well, but that's not been my experience at all. Where did that come from? And so a friend of mine, Louise Edwards, she's a naturopathic doctor in Durango, she went and did the research, and a lot of the books, the old school books before the 50s, talk about comfrey as the most healing herb with no caution. And then in the 50s, the books all start to say, careful, 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 and it's almost a repetition as the new books come out just to be safe. But in the 50s, they did a laboratory study where they took rats and they took the comfrey root and they isolated out the alkaloids, and they concentrated these alkaloids from the roots, fed these concentrates to the rats, and they all got sick. And so don't do that. Like that's what the study tells you. Just don't do that. But as far as holistic, when we do things in a laboratory and then think that we can apply that back out into nature, that's often false. It's not actually accurate. So when we take a whole plant and connect with it as a relationship, as a whole being, and then use it, there's so much more communication about what works or what doesn't work. And so I guess I'm just going to speak that in my experience, comfrey is one of the most healing herbs as a green. I don't eat the root a lot. I've used it externally as poultices, but the greens I've just loved as a green juice. So, yeah. Great. And of course, it's an amazing healer. I was out on my walkabout and I climbed a peak, Grizzly Peak, which is between Engineer and Ice Lakes Basin, sort of back in there. And I took a very steep, snowy route. There's a ton of snow in this couloir, and I got off route. I didn't even know the route, but I got into a very steep situation and kind of had an epic little moment by myself where a huge rock, when I got up to the steep face, rolled onto me, and I spun and it nicked my hand. But comfrey's been a sweet healing of my little wound there. So.
Do you always use it fresh?
I use it fresh or dried. And sometimes I'll put dried in oil. But you know, one thing I love too about making fresh oils, you can certainly use dried herbs like calendula and plantain and comfrey and mallow. And then, you know, just soak your dried leaves in oil and then take those off in about a month or so. But what I've found to work even better is just blending up the fresh plants like comfrey and calendula, mallow and plantain with oil, and then just using that fresh plant oil. It doesn't have as much of a life. You have to use it up quicker, but I found it to work so much faster in healing things than the dried. Yeah. Great. So right behind you all is burdock, and that's just another, it's just right there. Oh, actually it's right here, right behind me. I didn't catch everybody's names, so I don't know. But burdock is also just one of my favorite plants, and I just love eating the root. How many of you have eaten burdock root? Yeah, some of us. So the leaves are terrible, they're very bitter. Not terrible, but they're very bitter. So I don't think of that as a food. It's a little bit for a medicine, but it's the root that at this stage before it goes to flower is one of the more grounding plants, and also it chelates to heavy metal toxins and gets it out of our system. So I just really appreciate the burdock root for a good food. For me, it's actually one of my plants that I'm supposed to be eating all the time, just both for the groundingness and also mostly that actually. But it's such a healing herb. You know, with Durango, we got this huge mining spill that came through from Silverton and turned our river orange. And so really most of the residents of our area are benefiting by ingesting burdock root. And probably all of us, because we live near mining and just it's in our atmosphere, and then with smoke and everything else, it's incredible how these plants, the chlorophyll as well as some of the other properties are just so important for us. It's on. The burdock root, I just eat it raw like a carrot. I shred it into salads. Sometimes if you get a really fat, juicy one, I'll spiralize it into spaghetti. But you can also make a tea with it and use it like a potato in soups. So you can ferment it. We put it in our sauerkraut and kimchi. Yeah. Roasted, fried, exactly. Any way. Yeah. Yeah, so beneficial. And it's delicious. It's one of the most popular vegetable in Japan, called gobo, and you find it all over the markets and in their ferments too, which is beautiful. Great. And then I guess I'm going to speak about grass, because here we have some lovely grass, and I love grass as one of my foods. And you know, grass, all the wild grasses with their 8 amino acids as a survival food, it could save your asses. So grass, all the grasses around the world, I'm not going to say all because I don't know everything, but most all are edible. And I love them, especially in the springtime when they're young and tender and juicy, and I'll go out with my scissors and my blender and I'll just go and snip the blades in little sections so it doesn't stress my blender with a long blade. And then I'll just, put a bunch in and add water and blend it up, maybe a lemon or an apple, and strain out all the fibers because we don't need the cellulose. But the nutrition that comes from the grass is one of the best. Out of 108 minerals that plants can uptake, grass can take up 98 of those. So we just get this huge spectrum from the wild plants that we don't get from our conventional foods by far. The conventional foods are just generally, chemical fertilizers. They give back 3 minerals, potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen. And that's about it. But we need to thrive all the trace minerals, the entire rainbow spectrum of minerals that we get from all these deep-rooted plants, these perennials like mallow and dandelion. And burdock is a biannual, so it has a couple years to get established. But when we eat the perennial plants that get deeper and deeper and have more developed relationships underground with so much of the microorganisms under the soil, we benefit so much from that. Great. I think one of our goals is to move towards the river. So we'll keep going. And we're going to go gather some horsetail down there, and we'll visit some plants along the way. So if you see something you want me to talk about, stop me. Otherwise, we'll kind of mosey, and if I see something I want to talk about, we'll stop. Does that sound good? Okay, great. Okay, but of course I can't pass up this one. Who knows what this plant is?
Amaranth?
Yeah, amaranth. So I couldn't go too far, but pigweed or amaranth is one of the 13 plants. And maybe I'm just going to give you a little list of those plants. Just like, what are the wild weeds that grow everywhere in the world next to humans, which means they're resilient and they can handle change. But amaranth is one of them. And we use the wild amaranth seeds. They're a complete protein. And so even at this stage, which is still a little early, sometimes, nope, I'm not getting any seeds yet. Yep, there I am. So even at this stage, when it's still early, I'm still pulling out the little black amaranth seeds. And what's neat about these seeds is they're a complete protein with all the essential amino acids. And so, yeah, that's good. Very good. But I also love the greens. The greens are like spinach, and I eat the roots, the stem, everything actually, different stages. But the 13 plants, we could just do a quick little list. So it'd be amaranth, and dandelion, and dock, and mustards, mallow, the plantain, purslane. There's knotweed, which hopefully we'll find. And there's the thistle, there's chickweed, and the clovers, and there's grass, and who did I forget? How many is that? Yeah, and lamb's quarter. Great. And there's mallow. I don't know if I said mallow, but of course mallow's in there. And we're going to use mallow. Here's mallow and purslane. Oh my gosh, thank you. So just such an amazing plant. Purslane, if you ever get the opportunity to eat purslane every day, do it. Because it has more omega-3 fatty acids than fish. It has one of the highest sources of vitamin A, which is good for your skin and your eyesight. And it was Gandhi's favorite food. And it happens to be just delicious. And so what's fun to think about is how can we, every day we have a new opportunity to diversify our diet. Oh wow, it's another new day. What can I eat that I've never eaten before? And so even just picking a dandelion leaf on your way by, or a little purslane, or grabbing some mallow, which, thank you. The mallow is a really fun plant. We'll come back and do some recipes with mallow, but it's really good for our skin. So we can make a really wonderful lotion and shampoo with the mallow because it creates this cool slime because it's in the okra family where marshmallows originated. It's got this so cool texture. It's interesting, amaranth, who we met over there, has even become Roundup ready on its own. It's evolved in GMO gardening, you know, in these huge crops of, and they'll spray Roundup over all the corn and all that. All the other plants die, but amaranth evolved to be Roundup ready on its own, which to me is really smart. That shows some brilliance. But it also means that you might not want to, I don't know if you want to eat that specific kind because it's figured it out, which is good, and maybe it'd help us adapt to it too. I look at it different ways. First, if you can, choose environments that you feel good about, harvest there first, for sure, you know, so go to the more pristine places. But even when I'm in New York City, I'm choosing, when I see a dandelion thriving in New York City, and it's in around pollution 24 hours a day, but it's thriving. So I go out of my way to eat it because it's going to help me thrive in the same toxic environment. It's already figured it out. It's going to help me do the same thing. So I think there's a relationship and a balance where, yeah, we don't want to maybe go and harvest right from a mining plot or, you know, a fracking area or a place that we know has been sprayed with herbicides. Yeah, avoid that. But then also be just open to communicating with that specific plant, and it's likely that that plant's going to help you deal with that toxin better than you could without that plant. So that's another perspective. Thanks for that question.
Have you ever eaten anything that's made you sick?
Yes. One time I went by a rose garden and I gathered all these rose petals and I put them in my water and I started drinking the water and got really sick, and I think that it was kind of a city rose garden, so I'm sure they sprayed it with weird things. So that was one example. Yeah, I've definitely had some experiences of that. Yeah, eating some things, and then look, when I was first learning my first summer that I camped out after high school, I just had books, and I ate this one berry, and I didn't know what it was, and then I looked it up, and it was in the poisonous plant section. And then as soon as I started reading the symptoms, I got every single one of them for about a minute, and then they went away, and I realized it was probably more psychosomatic than actually physical. So, yeah. And so here we have some Canada thistle, which is a perennial thistle. Amazing mallow. If someone wouldn't mind harvesting some of this mallow for us, you can use the whole plant if you can get the root out. If not, just the upper parts will be fine. You don't mind?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, the root is the toughie.
Yeah, you've got the strength. You can do it. That's pretty good. So this is fun. So after lunch, we're gonna make some fun recipes with mallow.
Okay.
All right, so that's great. And before lunch, we're gonna probably make a delicious green juice, or maybe after lunch, with this thistle. So this is Canada thistle, and Canada thistle is a perennial, and then there's musk thistle, which is a biannual. But the Canada thistle is one of those incredible plants for our liver. It regenerates liver cells. And so sometimes it's a pain. We think, oh, why are you here? Because no matter what I do, you're not gonna go away. But I actually look at it as the most incredible resource because we're harvesting them, and I'm drying always the roots. And I have a whole jar, multiple jars, with the Canada roots dried that I'll use for our chai tea throughout the winter. And it's one of these plants that just supports our ability to navigate toxins. And when we're in this time of the 21st century, that's the game, is we're not gonna get away from the toxins actually so much. So how do we keep them getting out of our system quicker than they can build up? And that's the game. And so whether it's a little bit of cancer, let's get rid of it as often as it builds up, quicker than it can build up, so it doesn't ever become a thing. It's a constant preventative journey. And that's where these greens, these chlorophyll, minerals, and enzymes are the three, get those into our diet as often as possible every day. And when I say enzymes, everything out in nature, all the wild animals eat their foods wild, local, and fresh, living. Rarely do other creatures process their foods. It's hand to mouth or beak or whatever. It's just fresh. So when I think about food, I check in, there's so many different natures of food, and they're all good. I'm very flexible and diverse, and I like to eat everything. But I also really choose how much can I get the highest vital energy from my food. And that means direct from the earth, like as close to when I harvested it as possible into my system. And then anytime we start doing stuff, packaging, processing, shipping, preserving, it goes down. And it's still food. You're still going to get nutrition from it. But the vitality is a different scale. And that's what's fun to go for the highest octane fuel for our system. So the thistles, we'll come back and make some juice with that. But I love to eat all parts of the thistle, the roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, and even the seeds. I love to make milk from the seeds. And if we see any flowering thistles, we can make chewing gum. Don't be afraid of the prickle of the thistle. Drink down the juice, it'll make you want to whistle. The alfalfa plants are too strong for my tongue, but I like them as tea, but the flowers are delicious right now. So if you see one that you like, go ahead and take a taste. And the bees are so happy. Wow. So alfalfa is a type of clover, and it's incredible, but the three-leaf clover has roots so deep, pulls up minerals from 100 feet. When you eat that clover flower and leaf, it builds your bones and strengthens your teeth. So it's really a good high mineral food. Of course, the leaves are too strong at this stage for my body to eat, but the flowers are amazing. It's so sweet, like candy. Oh, the bees are in heaven. That's so wonderful. All right, so here's we have some thistle seeds, and there's a fun way to gather your thistle seeds. So all the fluff is here, and all the seeds are in here. And there's a few good ones. They're a little small. But sometimes you can just grab all the fluff and then twist the seeds right off, and they'll fall into your hands. But these are pretty underdeveloped, so we won't worry about them.
Can you talk about kochia?
I don't eat kochia much, but so I'm sorry, I can't talk too much about it. I guess I always look at plants like this, that they're valuable because they keep the soil from being bare. And that's what we want. We don't want bare soil. Nature will dry it up or blow it away if we don't have plants that are holding it down. So they're playing their part. Bindweed is a laxative. It's the opposite of its name. And so I don't eat it that much, but it is a good medicine. But I appreciate bindweed because it's another one that has deep, deep, deep roots. You can never get to the bottom of bindweed. So what it's doing is it's pulling up all these minerals and then putting them on the topsoil as it composts. And so it just is a great ground cover. Whenever you can keep it there, leave it there. But of course, if you're growing tomatoes and cucumbers, you can pull it out, but then just drop it and use it as mulch because it's such a good mineral-rich addition. I noticed a little bit of Indian hemp mixed in with the asparagus, and I use that to make twine. Yeah. Dogbane. That's it, yeah. Don't eat it, but I use it. Yeah. The red stalk, yeah, and it's the last year stalk that's easier to work with because it dries up in the nice fiber. Yeah.
We talk a lot about herbal medicine, but also, like in biodynamics, there's a synergy between the animals and the plants that we use as healing. And I think the bees are someone who really helps with herbal medicine so much and can help to boost the power of the plants that we use. And so honey remedies, we've talked about that and made a few honey remedies in this class, are one of the things. And the reason that I bring it up is also because I was thinking about the bee therapy that some people use, where they use the bee sting as a therapeutic way to heal. And being a vegetarian, like I don't really like to kill things, I have been a little like, ooh, I'm not sure about that therapy for me personally. But then I was out with my bees recently, and one of them came and was just sort of like circling around me. And I realized, like, wow, this is bee therapy, when the bees are like, I felt like they were cleaning my aura or something, to just have the bees in my presence and around. And so I think that to be able to spend time with bees is a real blessing, and to be able to use their honey is too, but just to be in their presence, also healing. So great to be here.
I have bees also. I keep bees at our farm in Durango, and with Turtle Lake Refuge, honey has been our main sweetener, which I'm a little bit of a sweet tooth, so I've loved honey. But I'm actually in this transition place where I can't provide all the honey we need to use in our recipes, so I've been buying it from Honeyville, which is a place in Colorado, but they get honey from all over. And I'm realizing that as a beekeeper, I'm getting more and more knowledgeable really about what feels sustainable in being able to care for the bees. And there's a lot of practices that really don't feel aligned with me. And so we're shifting our recipes to using dates, because I have a friend who has a date farm, and she's always trying to get rid of all her dates. And every year the tree produces more and more, and it's this obvious giving relationship that works. And with the bees, it feels like we're taking more than we're able to give back. And so I love now really holding bees and honey as medicine. They're more medicine than food, where it's like let's use them wisely and a little bit, and they're so important and valuable, but we don't need to do so much excess. So we're shifting our relationship that way. Yeah. But it is a pleasure to be with them. I know. Always.
So generous.
Yeah, and these alfalfa fields, they're in heaven.
Oh yeah, for the bears. Keep them out.
We have this lovely horsetail, which of course is growing all in amongst the watery places. And I think of horsetail, there's a couple different, well, there's so many different varieties, but around here we are really blessed with this specific kind because it's the more internal that we can use internally. Some of the bigger horsetails that you'll find in the south and some of the other places of the world you don't want to ingest. That's what I've heard, that there can be actually a little bit accumulative in a not so good way. But these ones, these skinny ones that live near where we live, are really beneficial because of their high silica content. And so when we ingest silica, that strengthens our bones and our teeth and our nails and our hair. And so the silica that comes from these horsetails can be, what I like to do when we find a nice patch of horsetail, and you want to make sure you choose a nice place where the water's clean. So if you wouldn't choose it down from a hospital or in a place where there's sketchy stuff coming into the water, because it can uptake things you don't want. But in a clean source, then you harvest your horsetail, and then you can dry it. It dries very fast. It can even just dries by sitting in your car dashboard or in your house hanging. But once it's dry, I use a coffee grinder, and I grind it into a very fine powder. And then we're going to take that powder today and mix it and make our own tooth powder. And it's just a fabulous way to make your own toothpaste, because you're going to get all the silica that helps rebuild your enamels from your teeth. And then I also like to use half horsetail and half clay with just a little bit of mint oil. And then I mix that together, and then I'll dip my toothbrush in and use that. And the clay draws out any toxins from our gums, and then the horsetail helps rebuild the enamel. So that's one beautiful use of the horsetail. But then you can also ingest it. So I actually like to put a little bit in my green juices sometimes. I'll also dry it and make it into my green powders. So something that I recommend doing, and this is the perfect time to start if you haven't already done this, is to make your winter green powder. So every summer, you want to gather the greens you want to dry and grind into your green powder. And I think of the green powder is an alternative to taking supplements, where when we take supplement pills, they're made in a laboratory where they take plants and then they extract the minerals from them, dry them, and then put them back together. And sometimes when we take things, break them apart, and put it back together, it's not the same thing. And so what I like to do is just take the whole living, brilliant plant, dry it, grind it, and then you have this amazing supplement powder that you can add to your smoothies and your juices all winter long when we don't have access to these fresh, wild green plants at this time of the year. And what's fun is you'll get the entire, and if you mix it up, you'll get the whole spectrum of minerals that we need. But we are getting it in a form that's so efficient. And that's the difference, is that minerals in a whole plant form are suspended in, well, when they're fresh, they're suspended in water. But even when they're dried, they're still suspended in the right proportions and enzymatically still alive. And we haven't altered it through heat. And when we get supplement pills, they've been altered through heat in the processing. And then when they get packed together, you can say chemically they're still the same mineral, but holistically they are a different thing. And they're concentrated in a pill form. And when we take it, it requires so much energy on our body's part to try to break it down. I don't even know if it actually weighs up anymore. And a lot of times we just, excrete majority of the supplement pill to begin with. So getting it directly from the plant is just the highest way we can get remineralized on all levels, from the irons and the calcium and all the different minerals we need, potassium. So horsetail's a great plant to put in your green powder, and so is amaranth, and so is mallow and dandelion and chicory. What are some other great plants? Plantain. What other plants would we want to put in our green powders? Comfrey. Great. Nettles. Clover. Yeah. A little bit. The thing is with clover, I find it's so, I always use my tongue to tell me if I want to eat a lot of it. And so with the clover, I taste the clover, and if I were to go and eat that alfalfa right now, it would burn my tongue. And so that would just be an indication, okay, it's a medicine dose, not a food dose. And when I think of making a green powder, I'm making it as a food dose, which means that I would be happy to eat a lot of it. Because when we concentrate it down, it's concentrated green powder, and we just don't want to overdo anything. So I'm a little cautious with clover, and I'm also a little cautious with dock. I love dock when it's young, and it's so delicious to my tongue, but when dock gets too old, it accumulates in oxalic acids, and then my tongue says, whoa, no, kind of like eating an old chard leaf. You get that burny experience, or old spinach, and lamb's quarter can do that too. So I always taste my plants before I put them into my juice and into my green powders or smoothies, so that your body, which is so brilliant, I just want to remind us all how smart and intelligent our bodies are. And so really trust it. And when our tongue or anything about ourselves says no, really trust that. And it means no for you right now. Even if somebody else is gobbling it up, your body doesn't need much of it or any of it. But maybe don't give up. Try it again, because we're always changing. But it's nice to really trust that, and then when we get exposed to something, it'll tell us yes, more, or just a little, or no. And then that's why I don't just put a ton of things in my juice and gulp it down, because my body doesn't have time to tell me no yet. So there's just that relational practice of getting to know that specific plant growing in that specific place in this specific season where we harvest it. That's really important. Yeah. So if you see horsetail as we wander back, gather a little bit of it, and it's just a great plant to have in your repertoire of use. It's so valuable. We probably could use a lot of this. Does anyone ever use muscle testing? So when I was living in the woods, when I was in high school, my mom and I would muscle test, and that's how I learned a lot of my plants. I wouldn't always know what the plant was, but I would pick it, and I'd bike back to town and go to her, and we would check, is this strong for my body? And if it was strong, I would eat it, and if it was weak, I wouldn't. And I would do that with mushrooms sometimes too. It's always been accurate, but of course there's a level of getting to know how to muscle test yourself, or there's a scale of that's its own thing, of getting to know how to utilize that. But sometimes with horsetail, you could, how much do I want to eat? Sometimes we don't always know how much. And so if you can muscle test, you can say this much a day or less, and that can be helpful. But if we don't know, it's always good to go small. Start really small and then build up. And that's because wild food is so potent that a little bit goes a long way. And so it's not like we need to overdose ourselves or put too much concentration in our system. We actually do better with dilute and a little bit, and then slowly build up, if we even need to, more. But what I love about nature is that it's so abundant, so potent, that we don't have to eat too much of it to get what we need. And that's what we witness in nature, is that the deer and the bears even, they get huge and they're just eating berries and greens and a few bees and chickens. But, but you know, it's incredible how nature is in this. They're very muscular, very high energy, and withstand cold temperatures and change. And they're just eating the barks and leaves and little things around us. You don't even really notice how much they're eating because they're just nibbling as they go. But it's because what they're eating and how they're eating it is at its highest vital life force. And that's what nature's teaching me, is that the more as humans we can imitate that way of eating, we're going to become even more of a noble species and care for this earth in a more sustainable way, where we don't take too much. We're just part of the cycle.
How do you use your green powder? Is it just like other things where you're blending it with water?
I put in a half a teaspoon in a glass of juice or in a smoothie, and not much more than a half a teaspoon because it's so concentrated. Yeah.
So you don't need to strain it out?
Nope. And then I just swallow it.
Cool.
Yeah, sometimes I add salt. You know, if you wanted to make a wild green salt, if you're going to use salt in your food, you might as well get all the trace minerals in your salt too. So yeah, whether it's lamb's quarters or in the springtime, not so much now because they're all going to seed. Lamb's quarters turns into quinoa, which is delicious. And there's 200 varieties, 200 species of quinoa that grow in this region. But they're all a little hard, you know, different to harvest. Some of them are easy and fall out of their chaff, and others don't. They kind of don't fall out of their chaff. And in my experience, I've tried to cook up some quinoa that didn't fall out of its chaff, and it was just too much in oxalic acids. I couldn't eat it. Like, okay, that's enough. So depending on the seed. But yes.
Did you say alfalfa in your green?
I did not. Nope. I use alfalfa just for tea because I like to keep it dilute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. And the clovers. There's two kinds of clovers I like to eat more, which is the little yellow, they call backyard medic or black medic. And it's got those little yellow round flowers that grows really low in the ground. I like to eat that generally. It's really mild. So I would put that in my green powder. And I like to eat the white Dutch clover, which often grows in grasses, and it's real mild. And sometimes the big head red clover, but not always. Actually, those leaves can be too strong. The rest of them I just use as tea.
Do you have anything to say about these guys?
Willow. Well, the willows are incredible for getting rid of inflammation and pain. You have to use a lot of it, and tea is kind of not so tasty, but it will work in decreasing your inflammation. And so it's just a valuable plant to know and have around. You can use the willows and the cottonwoods and the aspens kind of interchangeably to decrease swelling.
Is this the leaf or?
The leaf and the twigs.
I wonder if you put it in the bath.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant way to do it. And then maybe sip a little bit. Yeah, that's a nice way. How of
Willow, aspen,
and cottonwood.
What is this bush behind you?
Oh, this is the three-leaf sumac. In Navajo, it's called chilchin, and it's called skunk brush and squaw bush and lemonade berry bush. It has a million names.
It smells so good.
It does, and I love the berries, which, do you see any berries?
Yeah, there's a little bit
A few.
on the end.
But they're very, very high in ascorbic acids, this vitamin C, lemony. So you can just touch the berries and touch your fingers and get this delicious flavor. And I also make a vitamin C powder. So I'll gather these berries with sometimes the staghorn sumac berries too. They're both in the same family. And I'll use hawthorn berries and Oregon grapes, and I'll dehydrate these wild berries, barberries, different kinds of wild berries that I come into contact with. When I can't eat them all fresh, I'll dry them and grind them into a vitamin C powder. And it's just the straight berries. Sometimes I put in a little lemon zest and some apple sugar. And I noticed in the store, you all here at the Trading Post are doing apple sugar also. And at Turtle Lake Refuge, we do a lot of apple pressing, and then we dry the pulp and grind it into fine powder and make apple sugar. And that's a nice use of that extra fiber and seeds and skin and just everything good. But sometimes a whole combination of berries plus a little lemon zest and apple sugar is a really nice vitamin C powder. Yeah.
Do you include rose hips in
And rose hips, I do.
What do you like to do with juniper?
Junipers are amazing. I can eat about 3 and then I'm usually maxed out. But a bear, I mean, when you see the bear's scat, it's just got hundreds and hundreds, and they can just, but I love juniper berries when they turn purple and they have the sugars. But one thing I love to do with juniper berries is make a ferment. And I'll gather the juniper berries when they're falling, and when they're ripe, because you want to make sure they have the most sugars. And I'll gather about a couple cups of juniper berries, and then I'll put them in a jar, like a half gallon, and then I add good water, and then I put a screen or a cloth over it so it can breathe, and I let it culture at room temperature for 3 days. And then I drink that water, and it's a little lemon effervescent because it's been culturing this healthy, the natural yeast and bacteria, but then it has this yummy juniper flavor. Yeah, and I learned that from Sandor Katz's book, The Art of Fermentation. And I've been playing with it, and it's really fun. Sometimes though, when I make the first batch, it doesn't go well, because if it gets it all capped over with foam, it'll go anaerobic, and then it turns bad and it stinks. So I pour that water off, rinse them, and then fill it up again, and usually the second batch is always good. Okay. So you can still use the berries again.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's a Scandinavian drink called Gottslandrika that's fermented like a beer, made from the juniper,
Wow.
not just the berries, but the berries as well as the needles. And it's a delicious fermented beverage.
What is it called?
Gottslandrika.
Okay.
And the recipe for that is in Stephen Bruner's Sacred Herbal Beers. And I've made it several times, and crowds love it.
Yeah.
Sacred herbal what?
Beers?
Yeah.
Stephen Bruner.
Usually these are yellow flowers, but what are they? Oh, I see one right there. What is this one?
Does anyone have a name for this one? I don't. There's a lot of yellow asters. It's in the Asteraceae family. And in general, most of the Asteraceae families you can, taste. It's not going to harm you. Garnish your salads with. And sometimes they're a little strong, but the only one that I'm cautious is arnica. With arnica, it's a little too caustic to eat. Better external use only, but most of the Asteraceae family is pretty benign and friendly. Nice to be here with you all.
I was just going to ask, from your green juice, you blend it with water as opposed to actually putting it through a juicer.
Oh yeah, good question. I do. I actually, once in a while I'll juice foods too, but generally my main practice is just blending it dilute. And I find even if I do a concentrated juice, I'll still dilute it because it's easier for my body to assimilate dilute than concentrated. And it's faster. So my daily practice is like a quick green juice, strain it or not, depending, rinse and go. It's fast. One time when I was writing the Wild Wisdom of Weeds, the 13 essential plants for human survival is the official title, I was in the garden and I did this experiment where I decided only to eat those 13 weeds exclusively. So I did a 16-day journey where I had a little transition in, and then 10 days completely just those plants and water, and then a few days to transition out. And one day while I was in the middle of that, I was laying in the garden. I was getting a lot of inspiration at that time and did a lot of writing, but this tall thistle, it was taller than me, it was a musk thistle, a biannual, and it was looking down at me, and I think it said, "Juice me." I heard that. So I pulled the whole thing out, and I put the entire thing through a champion juicer, leaves and seeds and root, the whole stem, and it came out as this concentrated shot. And I gulped the whole thing down. And then within minutes, it had me laying on the ground, and it told me, "You've been breathing wrong your whole life. We're going to show you how to breathe." And so this is what the thistle taught me, and I still practice this every day. This is now my sort of my meditative breathing, but the thistle draws up energy from the earth in this opening spiral, simultaneously drawing down energy from the sky in this opening spiral, filling up every cell in the body on the inhale, and then on the exhale, it's all spirals back, closes down and gives it all up, and it gives it all back away, and I become nothing. And then on the inhale, I'm everything. I'm the center of the universe for 1 second. And then on the exhale, I'm just part of everything else and kind of nothing. And so there's this incredible energizing breath that I give so much gratitude from the thistle teaching me that. It took me an hour laying on the ground to try to figure it out. And then I finally got it, and then I felt a little nauseous too, by the way, by drinking that much concentration thistle. But it was such good medicine for me at that time.
I think that particular kind of thistle is also a really good COVID remedy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what that one's been saying to me lately. It's
Yeah.
like, look at me, I kind of look like the like the COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we really trust our place on this earth, that we trust this earth that we're sitting on, and we trust each other, and we trust our food, it's incredible how that brings health on so many levels. There's that deep, we belong here, and when our time comes to go, we're going to go, and we can trust that too. But in the meantime, we get to live in our fullness and our beauty and our joy. Yeah. I was thinking we might want to start moseying back. This has been lovely.
We could go around that way through the orchard.
Yeah.
Pick some peaches.
Oh, if we must.